All right, folks. Hello, hello, hello. Is this working? Is it working? Hi. We're going to slowly get started. We're giving it another minute or so for some people to trickle in. I saw walking down the hall. Hi, my name is Daniel Tucker, and I work here at Moore. And before we get started, I wondered if anyone had any announcements. You all do stuff in the world, right? Anyone have something that they would like to share with the people here? I cannot believe it. Yes. And the address of New Boone is an artist-run gallery. Awesome. New Boone does great stuff. Anybody else? In the back. Talk to JJ after. Yes, Jane? Great. All right, another one in the middle. Great. Claude and Gerard. All right, this will be our last one. Sounds great. Thank you. So we're going to dive right into this event. For those that don't know, this event is organized by Moore's Social and Studio Practices program, which is a graduate program here at Moore. We've also got a grad program in art education, and so if any of you are interested in studying that kind of thing, get in touch. This kind of panel discussion that we're having tonight is a good embodiment of the kinds of conversations we have here in the grad studies program at Moore. This event is also co-sponsored by our friends at Mural Arts Philadelphia and Next. Some questions to the speakers, and then with any time left over, questions, and then after that, you can ask questions informally as we wrap up the event. But that's it. Appreciate you being here. There's some people watching on live stream, so that's exciting, the internet. And the last thing I want to do is plug this symposium that we do with Mural Arts every year. So mark your calendars, July 21st and 22nd. We're doing an in-out summer symposium. We've got some great people, Roberto Bedoya, the Natural History Museum, which is a fake natural history museum, and then Taller Puertorriqueño, and a bunch of other neighborhood projects throughout the city we're really excited about. So please come to that, and if you have any questions about anything going on at Moore, feel free to talk to me, and also my colleague Lauren Stichter, who was just in here, is over there with the camera. So chat with us if you have any questions. And we have a number of newly accepted grad students that are here in the crowd. And so I also just want to welcome you all and look forward to working with you in the coming years. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Damon Rich.
Thanks, Daniel. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. The clouds have parted and the sun came back, so I think it feels good. Is it all right if we dim the lights just a little bit and get comfortable? It's a real honor to try to take a couple minutes to set the table for this feast that we're about to get in terms of stories about people doing planning and community development and art and design from all four corners of Philly, if Philly only has four corners. And I'm going to start a little bit talking about this word that's been around, at least in my life, for a decade, of creative placemaking. Has anyone here come across this word or maybe written a grant with this word in it? Some tittering from the audience, some brave hands. Has there anyone who's just never heard about this before and wonders what in the world people are talking about? Is it like making your bed, creative placemaking? Okay, well, some kind of so we'll try to bring everybody along, but it seems like maybe most people are kind of familiar with this idea and what it's maybe stood for. So in my old age, I'll say that it's actually really great to get to the kind of 10-year mark of a philanthropic jargon trend, right? Because it seems like if you do write grants, there are these concepts that come around every decade or so where you need to slightly switch up what you're saying if you want to kind of fit the bill. So creative placemaking is what's brought us here. And I think 10 years on now, the kind of cracks in the idea start to appear. Right? When it first comes, it's like a brand new shiny thing. It seems like the answer to a lot of problems, but maybe about a decade later where we're at now, people start to see the problems kind of within the issue. So displace making instead of just placemaking, place breaking, maybe some creative placemaking is really breaking places, and then people who want to push against that talking about creative place keeping. And so for me, this is this important moment where we go beyond just the question of do we want something or not, like creative placemaking, yes or no. And it becomes a question of how we want it. What are the specific ways that this thing should go down if it's going to produce something good in the end? So the project that Paige and Devin are going to talk about is not just what does Southeast Philly have to do to get Mifflin Park rebuilt, but what do they have to do to get it rebuilt the way they want it? And this is a place that I think we as artists and designers have a lot to offer, because we think a lot about quality and the different qualities of things and how painting something in a slightly different shade gives a different feel to it, or setting up the room differently might lead to different types of interactions. So I think the question gets raised about how the choices that we make in making the places that we live, how we literally fashion ourselves, our clothes, our beds, our homes, how do these choices that exist outside of ourselves yet extend and kind of even create our identity? How do those actually work on us? How do our choices about how we set up the places that we live and work and shop and go around, how do those actually make us in some kind of a way? So tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about something that I think art education, at least as far as it's formally existed, has traditionally discouraged people from thinking about. And if you read like Martha Rossler on the way that she felt that she was educated as an artist about thinking about an audience or not thinking about an audience, then you'll know what I'm talking about. So my phrase for this tonight is conditions of accountability. If we as artists and designers are going to get involved in these complex projects of planning and development and real estate, what are the conditions that we need to seek out or maybe even create that allow us to be accountable to something beyond just our practice? Because when we as artists especially labeled as such get involved in these kinds of projects, planning, development, et cetera, we enter into very complex power dynamics, right? The interactions between power in a society, the way the society is built. This is about a place far away in terms of how power is reflected in the shapes of buildings. But I think for me, I'm curious about that, but I'm more interested in the way that our buildings here and now start to play with this dynamic. So how can we enter into productive, yet maybe conflictual relationships to the practices that have mostly taken care of these areas? So thinking about real estate developers, environmental activists, economic development consultants, neighborhood organizations. How do we begin to learn to find a useful place for ourselves with our own specific trajectories and our own sets of skills among these other actors? In doing so, how can we learn from some of the most famous failures of what we might call public art or today social art practice? This, if you don't know it, is a set of sculptures by John Ahern that were booted out of their original commissioned place in front of a police department in the South Bronx and exiled to the very back kind of overgrown area of Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens, New York, which is an amazing, I think, an educational story if you don't know it already. So I want to talk about 3 conditions of accountability that maybe I have found to be useful as I try to create collaborations that result in something not just for the world of art or for me as an artist, but in some kind of broader way. So 3 times for your mind, 3 conditions. Condition number 1 is you've got to have an institutional critique of architecture. So I studied architecture. And this is something I definitely never learned in architecture school, where most of the forms that we deal with, no matter where they came from, eventually become self-referential. And that was not great preparation for dealing with how architecture as a discipline is put to use by other disciplines, like real estate development. So hanging out at art schools for me was a place where I learned other types of stories. So for example, and forgive me for going fast, a story where minimalists were interested no longer in just the object that they were creating, but somehow creating an object that affected all the space around it. People like Mel Bachner, who just started not even installing art, but just measuring the walls of the gallery, somehow pointing out the materiality of the physical enclosure. People like Michael Asher, who famously, this was a gallery, and the dotted wall there is a wall that was removed. So no longer was the exhibition space separated from the business, the office in the back, and somehow the office itself became the display of the art, understanding how this institution dealt with money and power and influence. People like Hans Haacke, tracing the real estate holdings of trustees of the Guggenheim Museum and getting his show canceled in the meantime, I guess no big surprise. But at the same time, kind of presenting things in such an overwhelming way that I think it leaves us today asking, aren't there better ways of explaining complex information like this than hanging something 3 feet up where you can barely make it out? The final person I'll mention in this story that was so useful for me is Martha Rossler again. This is a show called If You Lived Here that not only used the gallery space, but invited in organizations that were activists, that were building housing, working on policy issues to try to make their presence known alongside more traditional artworks. So for me, a lot of this comes down to a central concept of accountable development. And by that, I mean something different, I think, than like what you might hear about as equitable development. And one of the big differences for me is the question of agency in there. So equitable development, I think, talks about like an equitable world, like an equal world, right? That we all can somehow imagine and therefore work towards. And one of the issues there is that we oftentimes don't agree with others about what that equitable state looks like, that end state that we're going for. So accountable development for me is much more about the process. It bridges really quickly to questions like accountable to who and for what and by when. It's really a process of relationship rather than kind of an end state that we're imagining. And so in this diagram, which I made a little while ago for workshop at the Queen's Museum with Tanya Bruguera, if you know her work, tries to kind of lay this out. So in the center, I know it's kind of hard to read. In the center, you have this notion of a shared built environment. So the actual physical stuff that makes up the places where we live, how it's shaped, how it's colored, what is it made out of, what are the messages that this is sending to us about the way that we relate in society. And so this is in the middle. It also includes, of course, all these infrastructural pipes and wires and things that connect us, even when we think we're most alone in our most private spaces. These are the things that make our life possible. Now, if you look a little bit to the left here, out of built environment, you see the real estate industry. Most of the decisions when it comes to how things are built in our world, the way it's developed, is in the hands of private property owners and real estate people. So they're pretty important in thinking about what accountable development might look like. So zooming back out, there on the left, you have the big real estate people, the little ones. Now, if you look at the bottom in the middle, is what I think of as a very countervailing force, which is simply democratic politics, right? All the ways that people are involved in trying to create enough force to get something to happen that they want. So whether it's getting rid of a liquor store, getting housing built, stopping a noxious environmental installation, all of this activity kind of constantly churning around this material environment where people are trying to push it in one way or the other to make it what they want it to see. And also articulating drawings like this one, which was really trying to embody what a proud black city would look like near the end of the 60s with a group called Arch in New York City. And so then the final piece of this is you can see this red off to the side is art and design. And so what I was trying to get across is I think the many opportunity zones for artists and designers to engage this process and somehow bring it to a greater state of accountability. Because if you ask me, I think the most simple definition for accountable development really is the notion that more than just who owns it should matter, right? The simple notion that living in a place, whether or not you own or you rent, that there's some notion that we have of living in a democratic place where basic humanness qualifies you to have some kind of weigh in on what they build, say, next to where you live. And if we look back at the origins of urban planning, this was really what they were trying to do. Except it's important to keep in mind that they were only trying to organize rich people. Getting rich people on the same page was hard enough. This is a page from Daniel Burnham's famous early 20th century Chicago plan, which was sponsored by a big chamber of commerce. And they were simply trying to create a piece of visual rhetoric that would unify their position and help advance it in terms of the city's policies. And so this issue remains pretty strong, right? This question of we all share the environment, but there's this question of who's actually making the decisions of putting things down. So for example, the painting in the back of here is one version of planning, where a very pale woman who is the spirit of city planning descends from heaven to fix the slum at her feet. Or a contrasting view is when the Black Panthers showed up in a group of 50 to protest the release of the only ever master plan for New York City in 1969 with a great chant, which was, "Damn the master's plan." Also back in Chicago, they actually were thinking not just of the immediate impact of their plan, but how to indoctrinate young people. And so this was a book called Wacker's Manual that became an 8th grade textbook, trying to bring people around to the notion of a municipal patriotism to support what these great planners had done. And you can go on from that and read a whole bunch of tools that have been developed to really bridge this gap between, on one side, private property and decisions that we make about development and environments through that, and on the other side, the call to accountability, the notion that democratic politics should have some influence here. And there's amazing stories that I learned, because I wasn't educated as a planner. So for example, there was a woman named Sherry Arnstein, who worked for the federal government at HUD, who looked at the way that participation worked from a planning point of view, and said, well, this is kind of funny, but cynical. We all participate and they profit. And so she came up with something, maybe you've seen it, called the ladder of citizen participation, which said, look, this isn't a yes-no answer, participation or not. This is a question of quality. And so this starts with manipulation at the lowest rungs and then goes up through partnership, delegated power, and then true citizen control. And so these are, I think, some of the interdisciplinary stories that for me as a practicing artist became very, very helpful as I thought through what in the world I was doing. Of course, today there's a lot of cynicism I think, back to that either-or notion, that like either we have participation or not. And I think that it's always important for us as artists and designers to say, most of these questions are not either-or questions. And so when I had the chance about 8 years ago to work in a city planning office in the city of Newark, I got to see firsthand how many of these agendas clashed every single day with huge fights about what should happen with the future of the city. And in the end, for me, one of the, I think, enduring images from my architecture education was this project called Fun City. Anyone ever come across it? This was an unrealized design for a theater in the UK. It was an experimental theater, and the notion was if you needed a table, you could like pull a rope and a table would fall through this huge grid work. You needed a wishing well or a big rock or to change the walls of a room. This was a space that was meant to be completely under the control of its inhabitants to meet their desires. And while this doesn't exist, I think if you think about the way the planning process works, with the push and the pull involved with that, then I think that this begins to be something that seems pretty familiar. So with that, I'm going to stop this kind of abstract talk, and I'm going to invite Devin and Paige up to talk about park powers to give you a sense of how any of this might actually touch the ground. So y'all want to come up? Just a second. All yours.
All right. Hi, I'm Devin Miller. And I'm Paige Scott Cooper. We're going to talk to you guys about Park Powers. So this is how we were kind of introduced to it in the beginning of last summer, 2016. This is just basically a flyer to help like make people aware of what we're doing.
Okay, so this was part of the brainstorming process that we had. We also did a survey at the park where we basically came up with questions and things that we liked and didn't like about the park. And yeah, that's just us there. We also researched the history of the park and how the geography was about it before. Like this picture here, it was taken in 1934. So as you can see, it's been along for a really long time.
To start getting like more hands-on with the project, we actually went and we did interviews. So this is just some of the stuff that we came up with ourselves, things that we should do during the interview. And these are some of the questions that we came up, like general questions that we could ask anybody we planned to interview. And we broke it down into 4 categories to basically like be able to get more, maybe if we wanted to talk about more personal things, like one of the questions were, what is your title and what do you do? Like as far as like, that gave us more of a the reason why we were interviewing that person. Another category was about their organization and relationships that they might have with other people that we were interviewing. And the last category was in a perfect world, where we basically asked them like in a perfect world, and we finished it off with something that had to do with art.
Okay, so our first interview was with Ellen Ryan, and she worked with Fairmount Park Conservancy. And our big takeaway from her whole interview was that some parks located in wealthy neighborhoods are more important than ones in unhealthy neighborhoods. That was basically our interpretation of that interview. And that's one of our students' drawing of the interview and my interpretation of what she said.
Another interview that we did was with Nancy O'Donnell at Park and Rec. This is just basically me questioning her. And this was one of our students' outlook or their interpretation, what they got from the whole interview with her. This was my favorite interview. Patty Pat, and she also works with Parks and Rec. She is in charge of the stewardship department, which is kind of equivalent to the friends groups who work with the parks and keep the parks up and running. So yeah, basically our whole interpretation, this is my drawing, was that there's a lot of like diversity in the neighborhood around the parks. So it's like a lot of miscommunication because people already have pre-assumptions of what they think each like culture, because there's a lot of culture there too. Like as far as if they think somebody is good or if they think somebody is bad, and a lot of vendors are actually involved in the park. So here I just drew a woman and she's selling meatballs at the park. Patty Pat is basically telling her like, you're doing really better, so that's why she was selling it.
Okay, so our next interview was at Rittenhouse Square, and this is one of the security guards, and we were interviewing him about his job, and he was basically saying what he does. He protects the park, he makes sure it gets clean, and we then interviewed Nancy, and she's a friend of Rittenhouse Square, and she was basically saying that money from the neighborhood helps a lot when trying to take care of the park. Next, we interviewed Councilman Squilla, and the councilman, he was a really nice guy. We prepared a lot of questions, and he answered them all honestly, and his feedback was really informative. And our whole takeaway from that was that power plays a big role in rebuilding these parks.
Here we actually are in the neighborhood where the park is, down there, 7th Street. And this is us, it's not us. This is us going to one of our interviews. Here we actually sat down and talked to one another about the difference between like the neighborhood parks and like parks that are in the city, like Rittenhouse, that are more like up, like as far as like the things that you may see in the park versus a park downtown versus a park in your neighborhood.
Yeah, so we interviewed people from the Bhutanese American Association and the Cambodian Association as well. And basically what our interviews, they were saying that their cultures are sometimes misunderstood, and that they wish that there was a way for people to see that they can do, like they can contribute so much more to the community, and would love to be multicultural in a way. And that's someone from the Bhutanese American Association.
Oh, here we did a role play, like how we did like, so after every interview we did the picture, but like a picture where we drew like how we felt and like kind of made it into like a meme. But here we actually like physically went into how we think the interviews look and how they sound. And as far as like putting real emotion behind our picture.
This is more further research in our process. These are headlines from newspapers, yeah, in South Philadelphia.
Yeah, and a lot of the research that we did really helped us to more understand the neighborhood. I'm actually from the neighborhood, but it was like really informative for me to learn a lot of the stuff that happened before I was actually there. So, yeah.
Here we're making art, And we are taking pictures from the newspapers and putting them into these creative monuments. So yeah, here's some of our monuments.
All right, so here is where we actually started deciding what we wanted to go in the park, or like as far as how we think the park should look. On the side, you'll see like you'll see it listed out in words, and then over here, a picture where you can see it like actually forming. And these are just some more drawings. I actually drew the drawing on the far side. And oh, I drew the drawing on the far side. Yeah, these are more pictures. You want to
Yeah, just types of people we may see in our park. And the houses. Things that we don't want to see as well.
Yeah, and trash is a really big part of the problem at the park that we would like to fix.
So then we started brainstorming, well, how can we like present this to people? How can we show these to people in a way that'll be both informative and a way that will be something that they can take away from it and help us with? So yeah, we started brainstorming more. These is types of stereotypical parks that people would, our friend Jose drew, as you can see. And next, this is something I did where I decided I wanted to kind of build a Mifflin coalition. And yeah, we wanted them to help us with rebuilding the park. And this is our ideas coming to life. And this is us presenting it to the councilman. And yeah, so this is our Dreams and Nightmares poster.
This basically goes over like our dreams and nightmares. Like one side, this side that's closer to us was the dreams, and the other side was the nightmares. It just goes over the things that we want to see in the park and what we think we'll see in the park as far as when we rebuild it and now versus problems that are happening in the neighborhood as far as drugs, police brutality, maybe trash, and people feeling like they're more in charge of the park than others.
This was a poster we made about who runs Philly parks, and it's a very long process. Of course, the mayor's at the top, but where all the money comes from and how things, who's going to be in charge of getting this stuff rebuilt. Yeah, so this is just a closer look of it. And then it comes to our coalition. This is just a demographic of the park. And people we would like to join the coalition, plus a lot of more. And we turned our coalitions into cookies, and then the coalition cookies become a Superman. And it's like a Mifflin Square coalition Superman.
This just goes over the process of how a park is rebuilt. There are 6 steps, and they all need to be like really taken care of in order for the park to really like be able to be rebuilt. Yeah, and this is just a closer look, and actually I'll read it. It says, if Mifflin Square gets rebuilt, what good and bad things will happen? And you just see a bunch of people who actually me and Paige worked with this summer, and they have little speech bubbles, just.
Yeah, and this is more of the stereotypical parks. And this is just the whole overview of the whole project. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much. You all did great. We're just going to do a quick little slideshow change. And you just had an exhibit open tonight, right?
Yes.
How long is that open?
It goes until 6, so,
Okay, but then is it up for a couple weeks, or do you know?
I don't know.
So for 2 months at Mural Arts over in Fairmount, so check it out. The address is on your program. Oh, that's not what we're doing. Okay. All right, so we're just going to have this running in the background, and we start with Melissa. Is that okay? So you can talk from here, or you can talk from there, whatever you want. It'll just keep going. Okay.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Melissa Kim, and I am a program officer at Philadelphia LISC. And I'm really happy to be here today at Moore College because I'm not an artist or a curator. I'm a community developer. And so I want to talk about my perspective as a community developer on what is creative placemaking, and to talk about how LISC works to combine art and urban planning and community development to make neighborhoods stronger. So to give you a little bit of background, for those that don't know, LISC stands for Local Initiative Support Corporation, and it's basically a community development corporation. But we don't do the work on the ground in the same way that some of you folks here do it, like Tiny WPA or BRIC or Lisa Jo does it, and Teresa. So all of those guys are doing the work on the ground, and LISC is basically an impact investor. And so we are not doing the projects, but we're actually providing support for them. And so we're not artists, you know. We are folks that are seeking community development objectives, like affordable housing, economic development, small business support, investment in public spaces, transportation. And so we see creative placemaking as a way to accelerate these outcomes. And so where does this come from, right? It doesn't come from, a big, top-down plan, but it really grew out of the community. And so this is how LISC got into creative placemaking, is that back in, 2010-ish, we were focusing our energies in West Philadelphia and Eastern North Philadelphia. And they were engaged in pretty intensive community planning processes where community stakeholders come together, share ideas about what they want to see in their neighborhood, what they like about it, what they don't like. And what really bubbled to the top in a lot of these plans was the idea that arts and culture is really powerful in Eastern North Philadelphia and West Philadelphia. And these are places that are low income, that are often considered blighted, but the neighbors didn't see it that way. They thought that we have a rich culture and a rich history, and that it needed to be elevated more. So LISC, has this creative placemaking program, and we thought, well, why don't we, kind of work together? And when we talk about creative placemaking, we're not talking about like creative placemaking or arts and culture over here, and art, and community development over here, but rather it's how the two are intertwined. And so arts, it's really an umbrella term, right? It could be like anything. It could be a street festival. It could be a large, workforce development program. It could be a large feast. And so I'm just waiting for my pictures to come up to talk about the projects. But and it's really not about us imposing more artistic activity on a place or artistic things. It's really about bringing people who do arts and culture, like artists, like cultural bearers, together to join in with residents to shape their communities. And so that's really the distinction that we make. So sometimes people think about creative placemaking as these like large-scale projects. And so that's where the association of creative place breaking comes in, or some of the negative stereotypes or associations that come with it. So at LISC, we work on, we invest in projects, but we don't just invest in projects. We believe that projects should be embedded in place. So to embed these projects and these artists, we have in West Philadelphia, we have a committee, and it's a standing committee that meets roughly every other month, and it's artists, it's arts organizations, it's neighborhood associations, it's government agencies, institutions like Drexel and the library, and they all come together, and we sit around and we eat pizza, we drink soda, and we talk about art, and we talk about our neighborhood, and we talk about what are the priorities and how can we come together and work together better. And so we develop these shared priorities, and we develop a cohort of people that are like-minded, that want to use art, want to use culture to really make their neighborhood better. And we do the same thing, in Eastern North Philly. So some of the projects that we invest in, this is Faith from the People's Paper Co-op in Eastern North Philadelphia. They have a project, the People's Paper Co-op has a motto, and it's transforming the narrative of reentry. And so basically, they set up an expungement clinic, and this is the Village of Arts and Humanities as part of their Spaces residency program. They work with two artists, Courtney Bowles and Mark Strandquist, and local artist.
Is that better for you?
I think so. That might help. Yeah. Okay. And a local artist, Faith Bartley, who is formerly incarcerated. And so what they did after working with the community and researching with the community, they learned that reentry was really, a challenge. And so, and one of the main barriers to it was, that folks who had criminal records had trouble getting jobs. So they brought in, attorneys to help people expunge their records. And they realized that folks that were seeking services to make their lives better after incarceration, being incarcerated, it really wasn't a pleasant experience. So they made it like fun, so to speak. And they realized that folks had stories and narratives that were bigger than their record. And so what they did was they started the People's Paper Co-op, where you bring in your criminal record, and they will help you expunge it, and they will also take your record, you shred it up, right? You physically tear it up, you pulp it, you make paper, and you create what is here a reverse mugshot. And it says, like, without my record, I am. And so it opens up, new possibilities. And so that is like one way in which, art and culture can help transform, transform people's lives and transform the neighborhood by changing the narrative of what reentry is. So another example here is, actually, let me backtrack. So another project in Eastern North Philadelphia is the American Street Feast. And this is South Kensington Community Partners, working with local artists at Philadelphia Photo Arts Center, Lisa Volta, and the second grade artists at Moffett Elementary School. And so they wanted to do a giant feast, right, on American Street. And American Street is in Eastern North Philadelphia. It's this giant industrial, like wasteland, basically. And they basically transformed it into this amazing dinner. And you're thinking, big deal, everyone's done a creative placemaking dinner. But what's unique about this is that they actually spent 6 months doing engagement and making every piece, right, of the, of the dinner. And I should also say Spiral Q was involved too. So it was really about the engagement and bringing people to the table. And so they made things like the napkins that you see there, and I actually brought one, and they're beautiful. They were designed by the Moffett Elementary School students and Lisa Volta. And then they made the placemats. All the food was made by local restaurants, and even the alcohol was provided by local distilleries. So that's an example of, of just creative placemaking, bringing people together. And so after that, it didn't just die, right? So they're doing another iteration of the event. They're making a recipe book, but it's not a recipe book of like the food, but like the ways you can make your neighborhood better. And because of all the engagement they did, they were like sold on engagement. And so now they are doing these like monthly potlucks to more deeply engage the community. So this is a project at Spiral Q on Lancaster Avenue, and they partnered with Dorrance Life Center and a bunch of local churches as part of an intergenerational project to bring arts and dance to Lancaster Avenue. This is the Neighborhood Time Exchange that's done with PEC, People's Emergency Center, and Mural Arts. And for sake of time, I won't talk about it because I wanted to wrap up and talk about sort of like some of the themes that are prevalent in what I think of as like good creative placemaking as opposed to like the bad creative placemaking that, that people call creative place breaking. And so one is that a lot of these projects are grounded in comprehensive community plans that come from the community. And they're comprehensive and in the sense that they're also strategic. They're not just these one-off tactical, events. And they're community-driven and community-centric. So we have one of our sort of slogans is like to, for, with, right? Is it something you're doing to the community? Are you doing it for them? Are you doing it with them? And so our goal is always to do projects like with community. And then another marker is that these projects are collaborative across various sectors. So it's not that there's art here and community development here and, let's say health or like senior services here. We're really working, or the successful projects really do collaborate across all these sectors. And so that's my time, and I look forward to Q&A. Thank you.
So next we're going to hear from Lee Sumpter. I think, Lee, are you going to stay over there?
I'm going to sit right here,
Okay,
yep.
great. Well, I'll just get the slides going.
Cool. And I know we have to be mindful of time, so I'm going to stick to my notes just because I want to make sure I get everything in. There's a lot of ground to cover. But first I just want to say that I think that if you had a chance to read my bio, it's pretty clear that artists often wear, a lot of hats. And I think a big part of that is because, as freelance artists, you kind of have to hustle. You gotta have to do a few things to pay the bills and to, make sure that you stay focused on your passions, and you have to follow your passions. So for me, that means, especially if you're going to be dealing with an artist that's doing community engaged work, for me that means doing the projects I want to do with the communities that I want to do it with. And typically those communities are either ones that I identify with in some way, or they're facing certain challenges or have certain needs that also resonate with me. So I can say primarily up until now, I've identified as an art educator, also for a long time as a student, because it took me about 7 years to finish my PhD. And then after that, I'm starting to find my footing now since I've completed my degree as a mythologist and a scholar. And I think that as a result of those paths and those influences, my artistic practice is very much, it has a didactic element to it. And I'm hoping that that's not necessarily like in a very preachy or teachy kind of way, but in a way that myths and fables teach us and kind of leave us with gems of wisdom and insight. I love graphic design and symbolic work for that reason, because in a single image, there's so many stories that can be told or volumes of wisdom that can be shared in like I said, one image. So my personal practice, sorry about the fuzzy image there, but my personal practice comes from a mythic tradition of storytelling, world building, rites of passage, mapping the hero and heroine's journey, and that connects to trials of the heart and the soul. So my focus has been apocalyptic mythology, stories of survival, revolution, and rebirth. And I engage in communities through acts of reimagining ourselves and speculating our collective futures. So I think one of the reasons that I'm able to claim the space as an artist right now is in part due to a grant that I recently received from the Leeway Foundation in 2016. I received an Art and Change grant for my project Graffiti in the Grass. And for me, that was like, you know, the public recognition and personal validation that I needed to establish myself as an actual practicing artist, not as an art educator or a project facilitator or a program director, but as an artist in my own right, with my own visions for how I can bring about social change through my multidisciplinary practice that also makes room for education and community engagement. So Graffiti on the Grass, just to give you a little sense of what that is, it's a play on words. It's a kind of a metaphor for crop circles. If you're familiar with crop circles, they are the designs that mysteriously show up in fields, typically in the farming fields in the UK. They show up in other places of the world, but primarily there in Europe. The Graffiti in the Grass is a graphic novel. It's an interactive graphic novel set in Philly circa 2025, so it's in the near future. And it's designed to illustrate possible apocalyptic futures, alternate worlds, and emergency scenarios that readers can safely explore through the novel's lead protagonist, Roxy Redmond. You'll see the pictures. There's an image of kind of like the first some of the images. I can say, too, I can't take credit for the images. I am the art director and the story's creator, but I'm collaborating with an amazing artist. His name is Eric Battle. He's a Philly-based artist, and he is, done lots of work for DC and Marvel Comics. He's a longtime friend as well, so it's a joy to work with him. He connected me with a colorist. I'm learning a lot about the graphic novel process, and we're working with a digital colorist named Felix Serrano. He's working on a current project now called The Thief of Thieves. If you're familiar with The Walking Dead, anyone's a fan, but that is a project created by Robert Kirkman, who is the creator of The Walking Dead. So I'm in really good company for my first project, and I'm very excited about it. I feel pretty much like a kid in the comic store, so I'm looking forward to what that has to hold. And the thing about this project is it is a socially engaged project, right? So the goals and my social intent behind Graffiti in the Grass is to, one, put user-friendly and life-saving survival tools directly in the hands of Philadelphia residents. Two, to cultivate community readiness and resilience, supported by neighborhood emergency networks. And three, to address apocalyptic fears and these like everyday anxieties that stifle hope and the imagination. And you might think that hope is like this, you know, abstract, even kind of a romantic notion, but for me, as an educator, I follow the ideals of, like, for example, Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy, and the idea that survival, in order to achieve it, hope is really essential. It's actually a tool to make that happen. So again, I mentioned that Graffiti in the Grass has a few different collaborators, and for phase 2 of the project, phase 1 was to develop concept posters, so just to kind of get the initial images out there. Phase 2 was an urban survival zine and a map, and it's like a separate insert that goes into the graphic novel that I'm currently researching and designing with support for that. And the idea is to have real-life, up-to-date emergency preparedness tips, resource lists and emergency evacuation routes that are specific to Philadelphia. So through that, phase 2 focuses on the collaboration with the North Philly Peace Park and trying to engage that community and those that work within them, like workshops, skill shares, film screenings, emergency prep trainings, and even community drills with the folks from the Peace Park and the networks that they're connected to. So if you're not familiar with the Peace Park, I wanted to tell you a little bit about them. They are a volunteer-run ecology campus at 2200 West Jefferson Street, and they promote food and environmental justice, community building and self-reliance, as well as self-determination. I think it's important to know that the Peace Park is a Black-led organization that has utilized the knowledge and skills and resources within the immediate communities of North Philly to build a movement towards land sovereignty and security for Black and brown people that actually live there. The goal of the Peace Park is to educate and empower local residents that have long suffered from the structural violence that they face daily in that neighborhood where they live. So in many cases, the people that are living there lack like the basic resources that they need to grow, and not just grow, but thrive. So the Peace Park is addressing these needs directly. What's very exciting and powerful about the Peace Park and how they do things is that it represents this revolutionary idea, but it's also, they represent the successful implementation of that idea. And for me, and I think for them as well, that idea encapsulates what sovereignty and sustainability can look like when people have the self-determination and freedom to decide their future for themselves. And that's what, some of these other presentations are about. It's really about deciding the future for yourselves. Like, what's your park going to look like? How can you be a part of that decision-making process? So there's been an ebb and flow to the Peace Park's movement and growth. It can be marked like in 3 phases. The initial claiming of the land by the people of the Sharswood community and their supporters at the original location, 2400 Bolton Street, and the establishment of the Peace Park and its mission and vision. And then 2, conversations and negotiations with PHA and Habitat for Humanity that led to the relocation of the Peace Park and the major rebuild initiative at 25th and Jefferson. Right now, I could say it's in the 3rd iteration of its evolution, and that's the current movement towards land security, coalition building, and campus development and expansion in collaboration with urban planners, architects, and designers, which is really exciting because this is something that is not typically seen in a community like North Philadelphia, where folks are actually taking the plans into their own hands, working with architects and designers to make this a reality. So the focus of the current rebuild is the education hub, and it's been shown in some of the slides there. I'm so happy to have Maya Thomas here of UPenn's design, and she's a Diverse Divine graduate architecture group, and we've been working with them along with 2 of her supporters who are also fellow Penn Design students, Catherine Engelman and Elizabeth Bland. And so the Education Hub will be the site of a STEAM education programming initiative for local youth, and a vehicle also for rebooting the local creative economy and entrepreneurship via like neighborhood managed farmers markets and artisan markets. So these are all in the works to creating sustainability in different ways, through education, through economics, cooperative economics especially. I can say that the Peacetown Planning Coalition is something that's also in the works. So there's Peace Park, but then the expansion includes a vision of Peacetown and looking at a greater vision of the city beyond North Philadelphia and the immediate neighborhoods that are connected there. So I'm really excited about how my work as an artist engaged in social practice is going to fit into a paradigm that already exists within the Peace Park in terms of the idea of self-determination, creating your own destiny. That it ties in so much, in my opinion, to mythology and world building, because essentially that's what Peace Park is doing. They are building a world in which they are empowered and where they have the agency to determine their future. We also have some other folks from the Peace Park here. Pili X is the Director of Community Partnerships. He's back there somewhere. I see him. Okay. Right on. So I am, that's it in a nutshell, but I want to say, too, if there's time at the end, I can announce some of the upcoming events we have going on. Thank you.
All right. We'll go into Thoai, and then afterwards, Ariella will pose some questions to everybody, and then we'll take some questions from the crowd. So, okay, thanks, sir.
Thanks, Daniel. I want to thank Daniel and Moore College of Art for having me here, and with my lovely co-panelists here. I think it's useful, since Damon, Paige, and Devin has already covered some of the pre-work at Mifflin Square Park. Maybe it's useful for me to give you some context about what this neighborhood is about. So my family was resettled in South Philadelphia, a block and a half away from this park, Mifflin Square Park. It's 6th and Wolf, or Rittner, however you may want to see it, in 1975. And at that time, we were the only Asian family in that neighborhood. And at that time, the 7th Street Business Corridor was a bustling business corridor. But in the late 70s, you had a very serious recession around 78, 79. that really caused the shuttering of all those businesses within a period of year and a half to 2 years. And so, therefore, left a lot of empty storefronts on the avenue to basically was not inhabited. So this also coincided with the waves of refugees from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam at the end of the war in Indochina. And so thousands of people were resettled in this period, and they chose South Philadelphia as one of the main areas because of the very cheap housing that was available. And I say this because it's important to know that my family has been in this neighborhood for 42 years. And I don't ever remember Mifflin Square Park to be a great place. But something really interesting happened in the decades that followed with the refugee community living in and around the neighborhood. They began to use the park. They use it for a lot of things, right? Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian goes down there, picnic. They vend food. They vend different products. So it was I guess, taking a very neglected public space and using it for the best way that they felt, or the best way that they knew how. And then a really interesting discourse started happening in the neighborhood that the longtime residents started saying, oh, it's the Asian refugees who have come, and because of them, the park is in ruins. And I don't ever remember that it was beautiful, unless you count the last 5 years, where things have really heated up. And I think that for CMAC, our entry into this work as a social service organization is kind of strange and foreign. But we've been dreaming about revitalizing this park and the adjacent neighborhoods for the 3 decades that CMAC has been in operation. And it's only been recent that it has re-entered the news so much. It's important for CMAC because we're very much interested in the environmental justice, the equity of resources, that is lacking in this neighborhood. And so we embarked on a process it goes back longer than this, but I think the impetus to this was the shutting down of the vendors who were operating, I guess, informally without a license. But they were folks that were essentially kept out of the traditional job markets, and these are, older women and men from the refugee community, and they were just selling food, barbecued food, delicious, by the way. You should come down. The police and LNI shut all the operations down because of a shooting that happened in the park. And then all this specter of fear and gangs and, dirty refugees cropped up again. But if you go back in the news, like the last time that someone got shot in the park was probably, 20, 30 years ago. And then something else really interesting happened. About 6 months after that, this really wonderful park, I think you know it, called Rittenhouse Square Park. Someone got shot there, but nobody talked about that. So, to me, it's always been very interesting to compare, when I work with youth, to compare the disparities. You go into the neighborhood around Mifflin Square Park and you would think that it's so dirty, and that's because the people are dirty and we don't take care of ourselves. We're not good stewards. I would say that, I lived for a time just right off of Rittenhouse Square Park that, I tested this all the time, actually. I would go out and I would just, throw out something just in front of my stoop. Within like an hour, it's gone. Because there was an army of people that swept, right? And if they didn't sweep it, they had this really awesome vacuum cleaner that they drive around in. So for us, our entry into this work was one where we felt that because we are very interested, like Lee, about the people's self-determination, and not just the folks who are new to the area, the refugees and immigrants, but those for long-time residents as well. And we needed to find a process to engage it in a way that was accountable, equitable, right? I have been a critique of the re-emergence of this placemaking that cropped up again, I guess, the last 5 years. And it just smelled suspiciously like a rebranding of gentrification or urban renewal. And if I can borrow a term from from before, urban renewal is black removal, right? I mean, it's a little more complex than that, but we wanted to make sure that the process that we're involved in was not that. Now, as an organizer, I know nothing about urban planning, but I know about community organizing. And we embarked on this process starting in October. We still have a long ways to go. But I will share a story with you, a community organizing story with you that perhaps it's about building trust and about meeting people where they are. In the early 90s, around 92, I was hired by an organization in New York City. I was sent there to the Bronx to organize Southeast Asian refugees living in the Bronx, the Fordham Bronx area. And if you know that area, lots of working class folks, a lot of Dominicans, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of African Americans, as well as European descendants as well. And I was sent up there actually to work on this, the issue of police brutality. So we had a collective of, 35, 40 activists, organizers who thought we were pretty badasses. And we wanted to go in there into the community and we wanted to do work on anti-police brutality, right? But we wanted to engage the community, and so we did a survey. We collected about 200 surveys. And not a single survey said that they were concerned about police brutality. And you got to understand the context of those years, 92, 93, 94, some of the highest police killing of young black men, men of color in general, but primarily black and Latinos in New York City, including Asians as well. But not a single family or people that we surveyed said police brutality meant anything to them. What they said was they want the streets clean and they want a safe park to play in. So when we brought this back to our collective of badass organizers, I lost about 12 people. They didn't want to do any street cleaning. But we bought brooms, we brought trash bags, and we went back the next week, and for the next months, we cleaned the streets, cleaned the park. We opened a summer school for the kids in the neighborhood. And a funny thing happened. After doing that for about a year, we went back and had more community meetings. And we wanted to talk about clean streets and safe parks. And they didn't want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about police brutality. So, thank you.
This has been so interesting, and I don't know where to start, so I'll just say my name, Ariella Cohen, and I'm an editor with Next City. You can find us online at nextcity.org. We're a nonprofit with a mission to inspire change, social, environmental, and economic change in cities through journalism and events. We're based here in Philly, but we report on urban policy and things happening in cities everywhere. So I'm going to start Maybe you can hear me better now. I'm going to start just by repeating a bunch of words I heard tonight, and they were powerful. So, emergency preparedness, impact investment, creative place breaking, structural violence, sovereignty, crop circles, to, for, with, that's 3 words, self-determination, refugees, top profits, stewardship, equity of resources, coalition, collaboration. We talked about a lot of things here, but I think Lee said one thing that really resonated with a theme we heard tonight, that it's about deciding your future for yourself. You all spoke really brilliantly on different ways to do that. And so I'm just going to start and ask each of you one question about how we decide our future for ourselves. We're going to start with you, Lee, over there on the end.
Okay, sure.
So your story is really, really fascinating. And I wonder if you could just speak from your perspective as an artist at how you, what visual tools how you think visual tools can add to community organizing, and one example of that.
Sure. I would say I'm really driven by the map as a singular tool, and that speaks really to design. I think that all of us in some ways up here have used maps. I mean, the youth have used maps. I mean, you guys were using them with Damon. I mean, I think they're a good way to bring things together geographically. Also, you can identify certain needs, certain resources, as well as places that might hold certain importance historically to a culture, to a people, as well as maybe even a spiritual or sacred reference that is important for feeling connected to a place, whether it's the earth or, again, to a tribe or a people. And I think that in my particular case, a map could save your life, you know? I mean, when you think about that, the idea of, you know, it's just the life that I live, because this is what I do now that I spent like 7 years working on apocalyptic mythology. And if you just turn on the news, you can see it every day that, you know, you need to know where your emergency exits are. You need to have a very strong understanding of your landscape and your environment. And I think maps are a great way to do that, and you can build from that in terms of where you're going. I mean, maps also require time. You need to know about the past, present, and future in order to actually read a map and use it effectively. So,
Thank you. A map can save your life.
a map can save your life, right?
Now I'm going to skip around a little bit. All right. We're going to go with Paige and Brianna here. Did you introduce yourself?
No, I'm Brielle Guthrie.
So she subbing in, but you are also one of the high school students that worked on Park Power project.
Yes.
And she's going to start at Moore this fall, so big round of applause, everyone. So, you know, in that process, you guys created some really amazing graphics. And I was really intrigued by hearing your takeaway from your interviews. And as a journalist, I'm real interested in this story. So how did you guys, like, when you finished those interviews, were you walking around and being like, no, they bullshit us? Or did you feel like you were really getting the scoop there?
Well, sometimes I felt like they were being honest, and sometimes they could have told us more. It was like they gave us like a little bit and told us we wanted to hear, and like it wasn't all honesty. That's what I felt.
So at that point, how did you take that information and make it useful for you? When you felt you weren't getting the full story, how did you negotiate that?
So based on what they told us, we inferred our own things, like based on what we were told by them. So we just summarized it and figured out what they were trying to say, because they didn't go out and like directly just say it all the time.
And did you feel like those interviews yielded information that you ultimately like continued to use throughout the process?
Somewhat.
Okay. You.
A lot of the times, like, you could already tell, like, if they were being upfront or if they were sugarcoating it. Like, I remember one of the interviews we went to, like, they subbed out the word, like, wealthy or rich. They used special, and, like, I'm like, special what? Like, what's special? And then I'm just like, what's so special? Oh, money. Okay, that's what it is. So, I mean, like, it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard at all to like decipher what they were really trying to say. But I think that because we were younger, they thought that like, oh, if I just say this, they're not going to really understand, or like they tried to use big words to try to like make us like uninterested. And I'm just like, no, just tell me more, tell me more. And it's just like, I don't know. Like a lot of the time, we did have to fill in the gap for ourselves. It wasn't like hard though, but yeah, they did sugarcoat some things.
Okay, good lessons. I'm taking notes. Okay, well, we'll switch over to Melissa just to mix things up a little bit. So you said about the People's Paper project, which I love that project, so awesome. You said that they transform the narrative of reentry. So I was wondering if you could talk about one particular project LISC has been involved in that you felt like transformed a narrative of a community that you were working with.
Well, that one. Not just to keep talking about the village, but they're pretty amazing in what they do, and I would consider the village as one long project almost. And so they are there in the community, and they've been there for 30 years. And, it's not just about like a project, but it's about the relationships that are built like over the course of working on many projects. And so like project by project, like person by person, they are transforming the narrative of the neighborhood. So where folks might say that, it's North Philly. They have really high unemployment, really, it's one of the poorest, neighborhoods, around, but, the narrative up there is not, we don't have anything, we're so poor. It's really about like, look at this amazing art that we made here. Look at this amazing community. And so that's like completely different narrative than the one you read about in the newspaper when you read about blight and you read about, crime and violence and, drugs there. Like, it's a totally different narrative.
Thank you. And Thoai, so your stories also were really interesting. And I was wondering, you mentioned that you were critical of placemaking, rebranding, of gentrification, all that. And I was wondering if you could talk about how your experience, whether it was this working with Park Powers, working on Mifflin Square, or another experience kind of shifted your feeling about it, and what are the things that you would instruct other communities to do so that way it doesn't do what you said and does something that's productive and healthy for the community?
Well, I think that we're still learning, and we're going to continue to learn how to do this better as we move forward with this project. The Mifflin Square project is particularly complex because we're talking about residents that, let's say you go 2 blocks out in each direction. You're capturing about 20 to 30 distinct languages. About 15 of them are Asian, and maybe about 9 more sub dialects of some of those languages. And then you have, that's just Asian, and then you have African immigrants moving into the neighborhood, which we're hoping to be as welcoming to them as possible. And then you have lots of Latinos in the neighborhood as well, and then folks from the Middle East. We also want to make sure that the Syrian folks who hopefully when they get to these shores are welcomed with open arms. But I think that we're still learning, and I don't have any real lessons right now. And I think it's been a humbling experience to learn about everything that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And as an organization for 33 years serving, working with refugees, we thought that we knew how to do this. But in our work with Devin, Brianna, Paige, and Damon, we have learned, you guys being our crew, right? We have learned that not everything that we plan to do works in the same way. And I think that from the first public discussion that happened 2 months ago to the last couple ones, they have gotten progressively better, because I think we've gotten better at learning how to talk about this work, because I think urban planning or creative placemaking, whatever you want to call it, is the language, it's opaque, and it's unnecessarily opaque. And the thing that I love about working with Damon is that he's not amazed that people can do this. It's not like, someone coming into the neighborhood and, oh, look, that guy can use a tool. Of course we can. Usually we're just not talking the same language, but of course we know how to do this. We're not dumb.
Thank you. And with that, I'm actually going to get Damon over here too and ask you a question as well. You didn't get off yet.
I could hide behind the podium.
Yeah, right. So I thought that the opening presentation was really interesting, and the way you sort of drew out that distinction between accountable development and equitable development. And I'd be interested to hear about your experience in Newark and how, was it possible in your role there as a public official to create systems for accountable development? Is first question. Then there's going to be a second part, but that's number one.
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, well, Ariella. Okay, from the podium, back to the podium, okay. Well, Ariella. One thing that was really astounding to me as I, advanced in working and went from being an architect to an architect who did a little bit of planning at least and a little bit of art was that there were many very bitter struggles and victories that were won by people many generations before us that really set at least some basic institutional systems that are there that in theory answer this question about how can we have a democracy and apply it to how we build places. And by that I mean things like zoning, right? So, the first time that a city said, hey, this democracy now is going to make rules for how you use your land, and no longer can you just build whatever you want. Now, no more pig farms in the neighborhood or things like that. Of course, property owners sued and said, no way, this is our property, and it went to the Supreme Court, in the 1920s, Euclid versus Ambler. So a lot of times victories like that get a little bit shoved under the rug. And so today, if you go to have people here ever been to a planning hearing or a zoning board hearing? I would venture to say the majority of people that you see at those hearings, except with some very controversial exceptions, are professionals of the real estate industry, with architects like me, planners, lawyers. And so there was definitely what people call a regulatory capture of some of those mechanisms. And what it really took was back to what Thoai was saying. Oftentimes those democratic powers were kind of encased, like the way I guess Han Solo was in that carbon in Star Wars, under this whole other layer that made them mysterious, hard to access. And what it really took was finding people who had a very clear agenda, we don't want this, we want this, and somehow finding a way to translate between these tools that had been, in some ways people had attempted to protect them, right, for preserving status quo and opening those up again.
Okay,
All right,
interesting.
all right. We want me to stay here? Or we're done? Yeah.
Do we want to open it up? Well, let's open up the crowd. Got another one, but we'll save that one. Does anyone have any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, so what we can do now is we have 5 minutes to wrap up the event. So maybe what we'll do is collect a couple questions from the crowd, and then we'll have everyone be able to give kind of a final comment and thought. I see a first one in the back and then a second one in the back.
This is from Melissa Kim. I'm an organizer with gathering in Minnesota, and I've also decided to pick up some Greece community workload over at the Lava, the 41st
Yeah,
Podcast.
yeah.
So if there's a way we can exchange
Great. We've got some networking. And then right in front? Yeah.
So this is for all three of you. I'm just gonna like blurt out like random Q&A thoughts I jotted down. Trying to create creative placemaking environment. How do you create harmonious relationships with community members who may be not understanding or reluctant to change? How do you cultivate community readiness? So I thought that was a key thing. And placemaking versus makerspace and where the differences are. So essentially, how do you go in and then create positive change without like, any backlash? Or like how does that initial conversation go with members of the community?
So we'll let folks like percolate on that for a second, and we'll get a couple more questions. Was there one over here? Did I see one? No. Okay, I made that up.
over there.
There's one over here?
With a lot.
Yeah. Hi.
My question is related to, like, how does these kinds of projects connect to economic development in a community? Because people need safe, beautiful space to exist and live with and have access to in their community, but they also need money and resources and jobs. And that is like one of the biggest problems that we're facing in the city, where we have like super high unemployment, we have like the highest poverty rate of the top 5 cities in the country. So I'm just wondering, what is the interplay between creating these kinds of spaces and community and economic development?
All right. So maybe with that, we can, like, anyone who wants to respond to those can, and we'll wrap up there.
Can I just address
Please, please.
this last question from Amadi immediately? I think what I didn't say, I had talked earlier about the closing down the vending at Mifflin Square Park. What I didn't talk about is one of the projects that CMAC is working on, and we'll probably kick it off sometime this summer, is the vendor village at Mifflin Square Park. And in fact, our partner, Mural Arts, is here, and we're partnering with a bunch of organizations. We have already trained about 30 people in Serve Safe. So we're actually going to work with people to get licenses, trucks. We have some, what do you call it, container units. We have one, we're probably purchasing 2 more. We're going to do something very similar to the spruce thing down at the river. It's not going to be as fancy, obviously, because we don't have that kind of money. But it's a way to basically reintroduce vending in a formal way where the police or L&I can never touch them, because we're going to have a commissary kitchen that they cook from. They're going to vend formally. They're going to make money. We want sustainable economic development that stays in the neighborhood. And then adjacent to that project is all the work that we're doing for the 7th Street Business Corridor. It's a little difficult right now, but I think we're picking up some momentum now. And I agree with you absolutely, but it is for us just as important to provide economic opportunities for people, and especially for those who are essentially just locked out from traditional jobs. And
So at LISC, one of our main objectives is economic development, and we focus on commercial corridor revitalization, thinking that if you make a corridor cleaner and safer and more welcoming, you'll attract more businesses, you'll attract more foot traffic, and the businesses can flourish. So we think that creative placemaking is a really important piece of that. A lot of the creative placemaking that we do invest in happens along or near corridors, Lancaster Avenue and Germantown Avenue. So on a very just sort of basic level, like, we give money to nonprofits and to artists. So we are kind of allowing them to get paid for their work. We are investing in groups like Tiny WPA, and they happen to be here tonight. And so one project that I thought was really I mean, they're doing a lot of great stuff with youth and teaching them design skills and how to use a 3D printer and a CNC router and how to make designs and make something within like a 1/16 of an inch. That's like pretty cool, and those skills are pretty transferable. And they're doing it on Lancaster Avenue. So one project that's pretty neat that they're trying to do is like they are making bike racks, and so they're actually like designing it and building it using just everything from Lancaster Avenue. And that's pretty cool. So they're even bringing in the auto body shop to help do something with the metal, or I don't know, something. So that's pretty neat. That's like locally grown, and locally made. And then Echo N is a project that we sponsored. So it's Echo, like made, and N, E-N, like N as in Spanish, and E-N as in Eastern North. So it's like a pun. And so that was a project to find who the makers are, the local crafters in Eastern North Philadelphia, and sort of help them bring their products to market. And then we had a big craft fair, and Knight Foundation helped, chipped in, and somebody else came in too. Oh, the food trust came in, and we had a big old craft fair, and people sold more stuff than they'd ever sold before. So there's just a couple of examples.
I was just going to answer real quick the question about community readiness back there, because that's a great question. I can say that there's always been pushback every time I've tried to talk to people about emergency preparedness, because it's the reality of what you have to put yourself into to think about those scenarios is very scary. And then, of course, we know that it's also reality, from things like natural disaster, Hurricane Katrina, to even dealing with contaminated water supplies like in Flint, Michigan. So these things are very real, everyday realities for a lot of people. And so I try to attack it through creativity, imagination, and storytelling. I think that's why popular culture is a great tool, because it kind of disarms people a little bit. It gets them on familiar ground, things that they even are passionate about and enjoy. Like you mentioned Star Wars, I was just, already tingling because I'm excited about, popular culture and science fiction. And just one example is that I kind of tested out a situation with friends around Halloween. I did an event called Cozy Catastrophe, which is like a trope in apocalyptic film. But the idea was that we did kind of like a game show thing, but it was all around emergency preparedness and kind of putting them in different scenarios, whether it was the Newlywed Game or playing different games. And the prizes were like go bags and survival tools and things like that. But it got people, of course there's beer and wine involved and stuff like that. But it really is a fun way to get people engaged, but also think about hard questions that it's not always easy to do. So you kind of got to kill them with fun and make it enjoyable, if you can.
On that note, I think we're going to close out. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Moore and to Daniel and to Mural.
And thanks to our speakers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. Okay. So please keep in touch. Got our contact information on the program, and hang out, chat with our speakers if you want to talk more about their work. But thanks for being here.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. I mean, he did it. He did it with Star Wars, and then he was talking about Thank you. No, that was great. Really great. But I'm going to come check you guys at this thing.
Hi. I don't think it's hard, but okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Actually, I think it's here, right? Like, so this is my name. And
Hey, thanks for coming. Good to see you.
I can write mine on. So tell me about yourself.
Yeah, well, I think that's what the first year's probably for. Try different things.
Hey, thank you. You did great. Thanks so much.
And do you know